So I'm back in the shop and I'm excited to get going on this build. I've got my parts split out and I've got my seat flattened and I seem like I'm ready to go, but I need to think just a little bit more about the sequence of events as I want it to play out. There's a couple of factors that I have to think about. One is that some parts can't be measured and made until other parts are done and in place. So for instance, until my legs are reamed into my seat, I don't know how long to make my stretchers. That's one type of thing you're gonna have to consider. Another is going to be about moisture content in the joints. So this is something that I think can be easily confused. So I really want to spend a little time talking a little bit more about moisture. Last time we talked about moisture basically from the log and how it starts to shrink. But now I want to talk a little bit about how it plays out in the furniture itself. I made this chart over here, and really it just describes what happens to a piece of wood from the time it goes from a tree until it's oven dry, which is actually drier than it will ever be in its life as a piece of furniture. But oven dry is a descriptive we use when we're talking about moisture content. And you may have heard of people talk about percentages like 10% moisture. Well, really what they're saying is that piece of wood, if you were to weigh it, 10% of its weight is going to be water. And that's one way to think about it, and you do not need to worry about having to measure that. This is much more practical than that, and so don't be frightened off by that. But basically I just want to run you through this. So it starts out as a tree, and when it's a tree, it is full of water. Basically it can be up to 200% of its weight in water when it's actually in the tree. And of course, like we described last time, once we cut it down, the air around it is going to start pulling that moisture away. And as it pulls it away, it's going to be drying. And at some point, once you've got it split, as you can see here, it's going to hit a point called the fiber saturation point, where basically the cells have lost most of their water and you're going to start losing water from the cell walls, and that's when it starts shrinking. After that, it goes through a long process of just losing water as it goes down towards a drier environment. Now, if it wasn't a dry environment, it won't lose water. That's why you can store it comfortably under a tarp or in a pond or something like that and retard that drying. But if you don't, it's going to keep drying. And at some point it hits this range in here where I'm going to want to rough out parts and do some decorative turning on them and even have it live as a piece of furniture. And once it's made into a piece of furniture, it's going to be fluctuating throughout its life. It's going to be a lot wetter in the summers, drier in the winters. So in other words, your furniture weighs a little bit more every summer, and it's going to be a little bit bigger as far as the dimensions go. Below that is that oven dry temperature, and the reason that this is so important is because what I want to do with the wood I'm using, and it doesn't matter where I start in this, if I start with it kiln dried, which is going to be down in this area, or if I start with it green up here, I just need to follow it down through this process of drying and shrinking and weighing less until I get to the point where I'm ready to start working it. And then for the joints themselves, this is the key part, I need to bring those tenons all the way down to this oven dry temperature. Okay, and oven dry weight and size. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that down further than in this range, which is how the piece of furniture will live, and I'm going to dry it here. I'm going to turn it and shape it and size it at that point. That way I know that when it's put into the furniture and lives the rest of its life higher up in the range, it's always going to be bigger than when I assembled the piece of furniture. That's it. That's the basics of how shrinkage and weight work with the wood, and that's what we want to do. I don't know if you've ever had the experience, I'm pretty sure every woodworker has, where one day you fit your joints and the next day they don't quite fit, or the next day they're a little bit loose. Well, instead of being victimized by that sort of fluctuation, we're going to control it and use it to our advantage. All right, so what does this mean for my process? Well, I think everybody has the same instinct, which is to jump in and start carving in on this seat. And that's not what I want to do, because very quickly after I start working on my seat, I'm going to realize I need to be able to ream my legs into the seat so that not only can I measure my stretchers, but I can finish my carving. I really prefer to do the reaming before I've carved the seat because I like the flat reference surfaces. So the smarter thing to do is to get any parts that have to be dried through the process going. So if I'm starting with green wood, I'm going to rough down some parts. I'm probably going to rough them down into a shape that's something like this. It's going to be oversized and it's going to be tapered. The taper helps it lose some weight, plus these ends are going to be tapered anyway, so there's no point in drying a bunch of wood you're going to remove later anyway. If I'm starting out with some split parts from a board that I've taken, that's going to go very quickly. This was a kiln dried board. Now, kiln drying is not a fixed state. It doesn't take a piece of wood and freeze it in one place. So if I take a kiln dried board and it's been sitting out under a tarp or in my garage, it is not going to be 8% or 10% anymore. It might be 15 or 18%. So I still need to dry this a little bit, especially for those tenons. I'm not really too worried about doing it for the decorative parts, but what I like to do is to turn these parts down to the point where I can super dry the tenon while they're roughed. Because that way I can put this inside of my kiln, and I put it in upside down, so this portion is not in the kiln and this portion is, and that's going to selectively dry that tenon. That way, when I take it out of there, my tenon is at a different moisture content than the rest of the piece. I put it on my lathe, I turn the entire thing all at once, and then I'm done. I don't have to think about, oh, it's going to warp a little or change a little, or I have to take a piece that I've already decoratively turned and put it back to cut that tenon. I just do it all at once. I find that to be the easiest way to handle that. Same thing goes for the stretchers over here. I like to take my stretchers and rough them down, and some stretchers with no mortises in them, I just put directly in the kiln like this. Other ones, I'm going to need to cover that portion where the mortise might be so that it doesn't dry out as much as the tenons. It probably wouldn't dry out too much because it's thicker than those tenons, but I still like to cover it with some foil. And that way I know when it comes out, I've got two ends that are going to be oven dry, and I've got a middle that's still roughly air dried. And that's how I want to go about this. If you're starting with green wood or dried wood, you're going to be able to find your way to the same results. The green wood might take a little bit longer. Again, I do like to rough down the green wood to about this state, because that way, if it does warp, which is quite often the case, if it's going to change dimensions and warp, I want to be able to rechuck it and turn it again without it becoming too small to actually use. So that's where we're going to start. I'm going to go over to the lathe, and I'm going to take these parts that I split out, and I'm going to show you how I chuck them up. So here I am at my lathe, and as you can see, it's not a very fancy machine. It doesn't take a lot to get going with turning. When I started out, I didn't have any experience with turning, and it was all new to me, and I found what I think you're going to find, which is that you can really get to a plateau pretty quickly as far as your skill level goes, so you can make some really great furniture. That's really what I want to focus on right now. There's just some basic stuff that I think is going to help you along that I want to focus on. I do have a video, it's about 4 hours long, from Lost Art Press, that covers soup to nuts all the stuff in turning that I understand how to do, and that is all the more ornate turnings, but really just making good solid furniture parts shouldn't take you that much to get going. There's a couple aspects to my lathe that I want to point out. One of them is that I like to use, of course, a live center that spins freely here on the tailstock, but I also use what's called a steb center over here, which is really just a spring-loaded pin in the center of a drive center here, and it has a bunch of little teeth around the outside. I love these. They really make it easy for me to reposition parts and to rechuck them back up in the lathe. I get those from Sorby, and I think they're really well worth the investment. The funny thing is, I think my drive center, my tailstock center here, they cost about as much as the lathe, but you know what? They really are worth it in making my life a lot easier while I'm trying to work. So I want to take you all the way back to some of the stuff we talked about in the first session of this video series, and that is about getting the axis of the part you make to follow with the fiber line of the wood itself. Of course, there's two reasons we want to do that. One is because it's more workable doing it that way, and also it's going to be more strong. So chucking it up in the lathe is another opportunity we have to get that alignment correct. To show you what it looks like when it's not correct, I've chucked a piece in here that's a little bit off. And what I did was I drew Sharpie on all of the growth rings, so you could see they sort of are offside and they head one direction, and then on the opposite face they head the other direction. And what that means is as I'm cutting, I'm always going to be cutting poorly on half of my material because I'll be going uphill as I cut. And that is certainly not the best of results. One thing I want to point out to you is that in most instances being a little bit off is okay, because most of my turnings are going to be tapers of some sort. In some way, shape, or form, a lot of it is actually going to taper away from a high point. Now what you see here in this section here, where it's a long stripe, is that where I started to taper this, the angle of my taper has outmatched the angle that I'm off from my axis. So in fact, it's going to cut beautifully right there. So it's going to cut beautifully there, and it's going to cut beautifully on this side. So you don't have to be absolutely perfect to get this benefit. Where it really comes into needing to be good is when you're doing long cylinders, because in a long cylinder, for instance, this one here, you can see with it really nicely centered, I get one long even stripe along the center, and that is my goal when I'm going to be chucking this up in the lathe. While I'm actually turning the stretcher down, I'm able able to diagnose what's going on and make subtle adjustments as I go. So the first place you put it does not need to be set in stone. Basically, while it's turning, you can start to observe the growth rings and see how even they are on a cylinder that you're turning. Here you can see I've got a little growth ring off to one side here and opposite right there. That tells me that this piece needs to be canted a little bit in the centers to make it even. And I can make that adjustment as I go as long as I haven't turned down the ends too much. One thing I can do to make all this a little bit easier is I can split away sections. So on this one, for instance, I sawed away this portion and this portion to get the axis to follow better before I even got going. The other method is just to start out with a square piece like you see here, and put it in and do your best to subtly align it. Often what I'll do is I'll put it in, get it spinning, and that way I can see on the cylinder before I get it too small what's going on and make the adjustments then. If you do have it quite a bit off, I would probably recommend that you take the time to saw it a little bit like this. And you can do this with a draw knife, you could do this with a bandsaw, whatever you think works well. The draw knife is great because if you pull the draw knife, it's going to find that fiber line for you and follow it out, and that's the goal. So I'm ready to chuck this piece up, and what I'm going to do is come over here, and I like to just sight down the top here while looking down one of these faces and see if I'm in the middle. And the same thing, I rotate it this way, and then I come over here and I do the same. And this is where that step center really comes in handy, because see, it's really loose on there, but I know it's not going to fall out because there's just enough tension to hold it in, which is really handy to have. I'm also going to make sure, of course, that my tool rest is not hitting. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about tools and movement and a lot of other things. But right now, I just want to show you what this process looks like. And then we're going to talk about the techniques that are going to get you closer to achieving it. Okay. So what you're going to see is I'm going to start over here. And I'm just going to take a very light cut. It's really helpful to make sure there's no loose pieces on there that are going to fly off, and get those off before you even start. So now I'm going to take a look at this and see how it looks as far as those growth rings go, see if I can see anything. I can see that I've got a pretty nice line up here. This is running pretty sweetly. The other thing I'm going to inspect is how big are the flats that are still left, the sections that haven't been cut. In other words, one side is not cutting very much and the other side is nearly round. Well, then that tells me I should move this over just a little bit. Using my tool rest as a reference is really helpful to see what's going on with that. So if I put my finger here, and here I can see that it's definitely further in on this side, so I'm actually going to move this a hair this direction. Again, this is where the step center comes in handy. I just barely have to dial it out. I can move it over and just dial it right back in. And now I'll get it going again. It's looking really nice. So see how nicely centered that is? This tree has a little bit of a wave to it, so it's not going to run the full length even though this is a cylinder, but it's certainly not off center. That tells me that I'm in pretty good shape here. But I do have one area that's not really cutting. If I was worried about my dimension, I might actually shift that a little closer to my tool rest so I get it round without having to make it too small. But in this case, I've got plenty of material here. It's measuring 2 1/16, and really I just need to take this thing down to about 1 1/2. So I'm going to keep going with that. All right, let's take another moment to look at this, and you can see how nicely centered that is. The other side is just a hair off, but you see there's a growth ring over here and a growth ring over here. That just tells me that this was sawn from a board that kind of dips in the middle there. That's bound to happen at some point. It's still going to be very strong, and it's going to be easy to work. The fibers are nicely in line. All right, so this is ready for me now to taper out the ends and make a piece that's ready to go into the kiln. But before I go on with that, I want to take some time and start talking about some of the tools and the techniques that we're going to use to get this job done.